Hello, my friend. I am Charlie Simons. Do not talk. Talking about two things you're never supposed to talk about: religion and politics. That's what this show's normally about. But a couple of months ago, I decided to do a radio-based show because that's what I did my entire adult life. I've been on the radio or on television or both usually, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I found my gift, and not everybody gets to do that. A lot of people go through life hating the work that they're doing, but they need the paycheck. I could, even when I was at the height of my career in San Francisco, which is the fourth largest market in the nation, I was making more money than I'd ever made my entire life. This good old boy from Bakersfield in San Francisco, trying to act like I have something to talk about with those people. But it worked, did very well, made a lot of money. And even then, I probably would have done it for free. Not kidding. I love it that much. I love connecting with the audience. I love what I call marrying your market. Whatever town you go to, you learn everything you can about it and you become a part of it. You become part of that lifestyle. Now, San Francisco, that was a little tough for me because they do a lot of things that I'm just not interested in. However, you can find other things to relate. You can always find something, some way to relate to just about anybody. And that was a challenge. Um, they used to call me Bakersfield boy. I worked for ABC Radio in the city, and I swear I was the only card carrying Republican in the entire three-story building. KGO, KSFO, telling you. Talk about being a minority. I was there, that's for sure. But I love it so much. So I thought, well, I'm going to do a radio based show and I'm going to call it The Hitmen because we were playing the hits. And my first one was with a boss jock named Jazz McKay, going back to like 1970s, top 40 on AM, that guy, one of those screaming top 40 guys. And we were supposed to talk about politics. This was a year ago. And that's what the whole thing was about because he and I are both conservatives. He wasn't when I worked with him so much, but he became one. He woke up. And I made the mistake of giving a little bit of his biography, which was talking about radio. And next thing you know, an hour and a half later, that's all we did was swap radio stories. And I had a producer at the time, and I just said, this is just going to get dismal viewership. Nobody's going to watch this show because nobody cares. Two old radio guys swapping radio stories. They don't care. Huge. I was wrong. Huge show. And it dawned on me, even if you didn't work in the business, you grew up with us. We were part of your life, your everyday life. Radio had a power and an influence and a connection that you could never get on television. You could never get through print media, that's for sure. And the immediacy of it is what I love the most. Boom, I'm right on the air. Something just happened. Boom, it's right on the air, just that fast. And what I'm seeing, which to me is very exciting, is people are they're waking up to the fact that the legacy media, which has dominated and owned and controlled what you're seeing and hearing and reading since Bill Clinton deregulated ownership rules with the FCC back in the 90s, which I knew was a tragic mistake at the time. I went, this is going to kill radio. And I'll list all the reasons if you want, but I've covered it before. Suffice it to say, I was right. And I'm sorry I'm right. Because radio is all but dead, at least music radio. Talk radio is still growing. And people are turning to things like this, podcasts, for alternative media to get information. But they're also turning back to the one thing that you cannot delete, you cannot censor, you can't do algorithms if you have local owners who actually have the same mindset, which I'm finding there are still more and more stations like that. And hopefully, Lord willing, it'll grow. So much so that the left has literally tried to take AM radio out of the picture completely, taking them out of new vehicles that are being made, so on. AM radio is not even in vehicles. So many in Congress are now trying to rectify that, fix that, make sure that that voice is always going to be available to anybody and everybody. And I'll tell you that Here's my favorite story about why it's so important that we continue to have AM radio. And excuse me, 1989, the big earthquake in San Francisco, which they kept calling the San Francisco earthquake when Peter Jennings showed up for NBC News doing all of his broadcasts live from there and everything. And they're calling it the San Francisco quake. Oh, shut up. Wasn't even there in the city. City just fell apart because there's more people who live there, and it was very poorly constructed. Their bridges and their overpasses collapsing and all that, and the marina district catching fire and all that. He wasn't there, and the epicenter was south of San Jose, which is down in the South Bay, in a town called Hollister. I was in it. I was there. And I had just been hired by a radio station in the South Bay there, San Jose, called Hot 97.7. I was going to be starting the morning show. I was the new morning guy. And so they had me in a hotel, because it was 2 stories. And I was there in my room when the earthquake hit, waiting for the San Francisco Giants, Oakland A's World Series to begin when it hit. And all the power went out. And we were without power or phone service for days and days. And that's a story in itself. But why I'm bringing up the importance of AM radio in relation to this is all of us in that motel or hotel, we had to evacuate because they were afraid of gas leaks and so on. So we're in the parking lot. Emergency services, sirens, everything going off everywhere. And we're all standing around this one guy's car, listening to radio reports from the one radio station that had a generator that came back on the air very quickly, and that was KGO, which used to be just a heritage, legendary news talk AM station. It's been since destroyed by very bad radio ownership. And we're all standing around, over 100 of us, and he's got his radio cranked on KGO. And we're listening to reports coming in. There was no internet. No FMs were online. You weren't getting your information from an app. Everything was down, except that one radio station that had a generator. I'll never forget that as long as I live. And that's why I know how important it is that we continue to have AM radio and just radio in general. Even if they've mucked it all up and screwed it up and lost huge listenership by doing stupid things or nothing at all, it's so important that we don't lose that. So that's what this show is about. Hitmen, people who play the hits. One is an actual, why I want to have him on was ownership. I haven't talked to anybody yet who actually owned radio stations and managed them. Not so much of the on-air side, but ownership. But he focused on small markets, small and medium markets. And his name is Gene McCoy. My other guest on episode number 3 of The Hitmen, one of my absolute heroes in the broadcasting business. I loved listening to him on KYUU in San Francisco when it was owned and operated by the NBC radio network. Yes, the network out of Los Angeles owned, and New York, owned a whole lot of radio stations at the time. They don't know. Jeff McNeil. Those are my guests today on the show. Jeff got more and more into voiceover, and unfortunately, when it comes to air checks, I mean, I could play what somebody sounded like when they were on the radio to you, but we did these things called air checks because you're recording only when you're on the air. So it cuts out the music and everything else, but there's no video with it. So this is a TV show. Doesn't really help to play an air check. But you've really made it when you get nationalized. And that's what happened with Jeff McNeil. Let me show you a little example of his work. You'll see the video for a commercial for AutoZone. I'm not making any money from AutoZone. I'm not endorsing them, although I do use them. But I want you to hear the voice of Jeff McNeil.
time to take matters into your own hands, especially when a little work can mean big savings. AutoZone's got the advice and expertise you need to take on any job and get it done right. Because do it yourself doesn't mean you have to do it alone. Get in the zone.
That's when you've arrived, buddy boy. If you hear yourself on a national ad like that, that's hitting the big time right there. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Charlie. How you doing, man? Good to
I'm
see you
borderline
again.
amazing. One thing I used to say all the time when I was on the radio, and Jeff picked up on it, and so now anytime I call him, the first thing out of his mouth is Yahoo! But you and I got to work together for a minute
Yeah.
at a little old station in Concord, an AM/FM
Right.
combo called
KKIS.
KISS, KISS AM and FM.
Yeah, KKIS. Yeah.
But before that, I was also on the air, Bay Area, doing mornings on K-Hit 98.9 in the city. And before that, program director, KREO up in Santa Rosa. And before that, K-Pop in Sacramento. And I was listening to this guy in the afternoon named Jeff McNeil on KYUU. He was funny. He was irreverent. One of my favorite stories about you, and he did a lot of voices too, but he, like me, I used to do this too. I had characters, but I would record the character in advance, and then I'm live talking back and forth to myself. And I'd write the bit, or at least conceptualize the bit, and then record it, and then I'm talking to myself. You were doing that same thing.
Yeah.
So you had several cast of characters like Rick Dees did down in Los Angeles, KISS FM.
Well, it was a lot easier to just record your own characters rather than trying to book a real celebrity or whatever,
Wasn't it?
You could totally control the conversation.
Exactly. And but talk about irreverence. One of the things I heard Jeff do one time, and this is when I decided, you know what, I'm going to call him. And you took my call, and we wound up getting together for lunch at a place called The Palm. And we sat at a booth with your caricature right there above the table. I'm like, man, this has arrived right here. Your billboards were everywhere. Jeff McNeil was huge in San Francisco on KYUU. Just huge.
For a little tiny moment in time.
But 8 years, pretty good moment. Yeah. And but I'm listening to you when I decided I was going to call this guy. I got to call this guy. You couldn't have been more gracious. You couldn't have been nicer. And I've just considered you a fast friend ever since. But you were on the radio, and it was when Rock Me Amadeus was the #1 song in the nation by a German artist who called himself Falco.
Yeah.
Obnoxious song.
Yeah.
Obnoxious.
Yeah.
But it was #1. It shot up the charts. And here's Jeff on KYUU doing a countdown of, I think, the top 3 most requested songs, top 5 maybe. And you get to Falco, and you start the thing, and you go, this is the #1 song again. And then you started lecturing the audience. You people did this. You're responsible for this song becoming #1. Stop calling the radio station and asking for it. I'm begging you. Cut it out. This song is so awful. He's talking this way on the radio. I'm like, jocks don't talk that way. They don't talk that way. Wow. No, you're supposed to love every song. You're not supposed to have any opinion. If you don't like a song, you never say that on the air, but you did.
Yeah. Well, I forgot it, but thank you for remembering. I forgot so much. You probably remember a lot more about it than I do, but yeah, it was fun. And I had a good ear for picking out songs that would not withstand the test of time, and that was one of them. Because there was a lot of great songs in the 80s, but there was also a lot of really bad songs in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
But it was fun, It was when radio was radio, and we got to contribute and be a part of people's lives. And it was, they say video killed the radio star, but what killed the radio star really was MP3 and file sharing and stuff like that. Soon as Napster came out, and it's like, why listen to the radio when you can just grab all your favorites, and no commercials, no, Yeah, it was sad. And then the deregulation, of course, that happened under the Bill Clinton administration.
Yeah.
That was really kind of the death knell for radio as
That's
we
what I've been
knew it.
saying too. They don't need us anymore.
Well, it's
The
true.
public people used to need us to. They
Yeah,
would wait for us to play their favorite song. They would
yeah,
wait for us to tell them what fun things were coming up this weekend, what concerts were coming to
right.
town.
It was
They
before
waited for us to tell them what the weather was like, what
yeah,
time
yeah.
it was.
We had an
Um,
important role to play, and it
yeah,
was an honor to be a part of it, and it was a very special, select group of us that got to be a part of people's lives every day, and I never took that for granted. It was a lot of fun, and I was sorry to see it go, but there reached a point where I always told myself I would do radio for as long as it was lucrative or I was having fun, hopefully both. And then there got to be a time when it was neither. And that's when I decided at 37 I had to retire and just step away from it and not look back and find
you
something
did
else
what
to
so
do.
many of us dream of doing, though, and that's getting into voiceover work, and it's very lucrative if you can get
Well,
yourself
it could be.
national deals like you
Yeah.
did. Can be very lucrative. But
That's
everything when
changing
it comes to
too.
radio, everything everybody needs is right here on this phone.
Yeah.
They don't have to
It's
wait for us to play their
fantastic.
favorite song. They don't have to wait for
Oh
us
my
to tell
God.
them what the weather's
Yeah.
like. They don't have to wait for us
No.
to tell us what fun
And
things are happening
you know
locally.
what? I don't listen to the radio anymore. I used to live, eat, breathe, and sleep radio when I was younger. I always wanted to do it, and there was that song by Harry Chapin, WOLD, and that song came out before I was on the radio, but it really hit me. It just something about it just got to the core of me, and even before I started radio, because of that song, I think I decided that by the time I was 40, I didn't want to be doing that. I don't want to be that guy with the broken marriage and the you know fat gut, although that still came anyway. But I didn't want to be that guy traveling from town to town and just trying to relate to a 16-year-old when I was 40. It just didn't appeal to me. Even when I was 18, I knew I wouldn't want to be doing that. So,
They can come up with very creative ways to fire you, to get rid of you. And it can
oh
be
yeah,
literally just a nuance, a little shift in the ratings, a little change in a demographic that they wanted to
sure.
target, but you didn't do well in that demographic. Oh, we need to get somebody else who can relate to that audience because you
Yeah.
no longer fit that demographic. I know guys who got fired for turning 40.
Oh wow, that's
Got
rough.
fired for turning 40
That's rough.
because, well, you can't relate to our target demographic, which is a 19-year-old female. And you're right. He can't. I couldn't.
Well,
But you
wait a
got to
minute. I've
find
got a
other ways to
19-year-old
relate to
daughter.
people.
Of course I can. But no, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
I had a very, I worked right up to the end until I finally, it was COVID. Really, it changed everything for
Wow.
me. That's when
Good for
I
you
got,
for lasting as long as you did. That's
yeah.
awesome. And I,
Salem Media Group was the last big company I worked for in Sacramento, and I loved it. I probably would have retired there, but COVID cutbacks because they're commercially licensed. The only way they can make money is selling commercials. Well, in California, when that train wreck of a Governor Hairdo, shut down all the businesses deemed non-essential,
yeah.
why would they continue advertising on the radio? So you had all these clients canceling contracts, and they're like, "If you have to sue me, sue me." But I'm not going to keep paying for advertising of a business I can't keep open, and
Yeah.
who knows how long it's going to be. So they found themselves in trouble like
COVID
that.
wrecked a lot of things.
It sure
In
did.
fact, I disbanded my classic rock band that I fronted for 10 years.
What was the name of that band, by the way?
Mrs. Jones' Revenge.
That's it, Mrs. Jones' Revenge.
And there's a lot of videos on
You
YouTube if
guys did
anybody wants
well
to.
down in SoCal.
Yeah, we did good. It was like a dream come true. I started a band when I was 50 years old. Who does that?
Uh-huh.
And I was doing vocal impressions of the because I used to do voice impressions as you mentioned. And then one day I was driving around. It was in 2009. I was in my car and I'm singing along with Gene McDaniels. He took 100 pounds of clay, and I realized I was molding my voice to kind of sound like
Sound
his.
like him.
And I went like, gee, I wonder if I can take this lifetime of doing vocal impressions and apply them to singers, even though I've never sung in my life, never had a lesson. Anyway, I started doing it tentatively. Long story short, took off. I could do it.
It
And then I
really
thought,
did.
how fun would it be to do this with a band live?
But at the
Basically,
same time, you were also the voice of was it KTLA in Los Angeles,
no,
Channel
it was
5, I think.
NBC. It was NBC. It was KNBC.
NBC, yeah.
Yeah, for many years.
You were the voice of that, and you were doing all these national. You've done well. Like me, everybody has to start off in a small market
Yeah.
because you're not going to get yourself a major market gig
No,
right out of your radio station in college.
and you
You got to
shouldn't.
work your way up. But you and I both share a similar path in that we started small, but we worked our way up to the majors very
Yeah.
quickly. So I got
Yeah.
a lot of firsts at a very young age that most people never did. And I'm grateful for it, but also at the same time, it unhinged me. When you're making that kind of money and getting that kind of attention, and you're only 20, early 20s, and you're already getting that kind of focus, it changes you because we were created to worship, not to be worshipped. So I don't know if
Well,
you had that same.
I,
I mean,
I,
I got into drugs. I got into the whole rock and roll lifestyle before I
I
got
was
saved.
lucky because I met Kim, my wife of 43 years. I met her when I was 20, and she kept me grounded because A, she wasn't a fan, so she didn't even listen to my show really, and she doesn't think I'm particularly funny or entertaining. So I like to describe her as the icy wind beneath my wings,
The icy wind beneath your wings. That's
Yeah.
funny.
So she really did keep, I have to give her all the credit because she kept me grounded. She helped me see reality. So I didn't really get caught up in that. I mean, yeah, I enjoyed the moment and I had a lot of confidence in what I was doing, but um and you were very kind to say how nice I was to you when you first reached out to me. Well, that's why, because I was a grounded person, you know. I knew that what I was doing wasn't really anything special, except for the fact that I was getting to do what I loved and getting paid for it. That was really terrific. But that doesn't make me better or more talented or interesting than anybody else.
We
You know,
were in
I'm
the right place at the right time. But you
well,
and I both, we got people in our past who we can look back on and with great appreciation because they
oh
lifted
yeah,
us up.
sure.
They saw something in us that we may not have even seen in ourselves, and they
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, you can take it." Now, of course, they made money off of us doing well for them, and that's
Mhm.
fine. That's
Sure.
reciprocal. A guy like
I was
that.
just on the phone with my former LA voiceover agent, basically telling him the same thing because he saw something in me 20 years ago after I was out of radio, but really wanted to get into voiceover. And that was a whole different animal. I mean, I had to basically forget everything I ever learned about being a jock on the air and talking like this and da ba ba da da da. No, that's not going to work.
Be real. You
Got
got
to be
to.
real. And it took a long time. It took a little while to break down and relearn everything so I could sound like the guy in that AutoZone commercial you so graciously played.
I had to learn real quick too how to read copy, as we call it, the script, but
Yeah,
make it sound like it's just coming right from your heart and your mind, and you're not
right,
looking at words on a page.
right,
That's a challenge that many radio people never seem to master. I hear commercials now, and you can tell if it's produced by an ad agency or if it's produced in house at a radio station because they have that sing-songy announcer delivery.
right.
That's not real. That's not how your neighbor. That's not how you and your buddy talk. So that's a hard thing to learn. I want to bring into the mix now Gene McCoy. Gene was one of those guys in the smaller markets who was recognizing talent and bringing them up through the ranks. And he's on
I
Do Not
wish I could
Talk
have
now.
worked for him.
Hello, buddy.
Hey, Gene,
Hello. Hi.
This is Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil. This is Gene McCoy.
pleasure to meet you,
Yep.
sir.
Gene, walk us through how you got started, when you got started, and what your love of radio. When did that begin?
Well, I guess the love of radio, I remember probably the earliest was I was about 3 or 4 years old, and my mom got her first portable radio. Now, this was a tube type radio. I was born in 1955, so this has been the late 50s. And it was a tube portable radio. It had batteries. It had the old Conelrad designations on the dial. I remember that, for the before the emergency broadcast system, which is now the emergency alert system. You had Conelrad, whether I think there were 640 and something that were designated that everybody was a go-to if they're, this was the build up the Cold War and everything. But anyway, she would be doing her ironing. She had the knee-high soda bottle with the sprinkler cap on it. And
Knee high.
Yep. And she would be listening to the Cleveland Indians baseball games while she was doing her ironing on this portable radio. And I thought, this magical box, she's listening. This game is happening in Cleveland, or maybe it's even happening in LA or New York or wherever. But there's my mom listening to this game. This is magical. And we didn't have a TV until I think I was 6, I believe. So about 1961. So there was like 2 or 3 years there where radio was it. We didn't have TV. And then of course they played the music and so forth, and his local hometown station. I grew up in Mount Vernon, Ohio. And so then fast forward about 7 or 8, a few of my classmates in school were getting transistor radios. And it's like, I got to have one of those. This is something to be able to have your own radio and listen to the station you wanted to listen to.
Whenever you wanted.
Yes.
With the antenna.
Yeah. And so I got this little 7 transistor, which I was kind of proud because some of my classmates only had 2 transistor radios. And I didn't know what transistors were, but I thought it's better to have 7 than it is 2 or 3.
You were the rich kid on the block.
Yeah. 7 transistor radio. So I fell in love with radio, and I listened a lot to the hometown station, which gradually over time gravitated towards a top 40 format, but it was a full service. It was a true small town station, local news. I mean, really in-depth news. I remember a couple of times where I won a scholarship, and the local newsman at the radio station was actually at the banquet where they were awarding these scholarships. And I don't think that's done at all today, but that was even rare back then, that you actually had that kind of local news coverage from the local radio station. And so then I'll fast forward. Well, I guess maybe background. I was always a good reader, good oral reader. And the pastor of my church kind of discovered this when we were ready to do a Christmas pageant. It was about this time of the year. I was 8 years old. And, I forget what role it was, but he needed somebody about my age to do this role. And it was a slide with voiceover presentation. And so he said, gee, you can sure read well. And this is the major part in the play. And we actually went to the radio station, recorded on reel to reel, and then it was all timed with the slides. We went out to this farm, and
was it an AM station?
Yes. Well, it was AM and FM.
3 towers right behind the building?
It was two tower directional
okay.
AM, 1300, Lucky 13 radio. And then we had an FM as well. But at that time, the AM, it was all about AM. The FM didn't mean much then. So anyway, we recorded it there. So then fast forward, one of the other guys older than me had been on the air at the radio station, and he was actually going off to Vietnam. And I was a junior in high school, and they approached the pastor and said, do you have anybody else at your church that could, a high school kid that could be on the air you think would be capable? And he says, yeah, I think I do. And so he calls me up. He says, go out and talk to the people at the radio station. And so as a junior in high school, I found my way on the air. And that, if you remember about that time, I think it had actually happened a little bit before that. The FCC had said if your community was a certain size, and I forget whether it was 10,000 or whatever it was, then you had to have so much unduplicated programming on your FM. You could not, they had always done a simulcast, 100% simulcast
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And you had to have, I think, 40% non-duplicated programming. Well, they played a couple of paid religion programs. They had like maybe an hour or 2 in the middle of the day, but they were short. They needed 4 more hours. And so they had, like I say, they had a guy before me. And so 6 to 10 p.m., they split off and ran the FM. Believe it or not, they only ran till 10 because they had to, that was the minimum. You had to go till 10 on an FM. So I found myself on Country 94, and it was a great place to learn because the AM was top 40, and they had actually doing a pretty good job. They had some pretty good competition. I know CKLW came in, boomed into there, and it was big. So,
That's Detroit, right?
Yeah, Windsor, Detroit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big station. So they had some pretty stiff competition, and so they had to do a pretty good job. But again, the localization is what really made it go. So I found myself on the air.
Focusing local as and Jeff, I want to hear a little bit of how you started, because I know you started in smaller markets, including Monterey, which what a great place to work. I get paid to live in Monterey, but it was the small markets, Jeff and Gene, not only had to compete with, because every market had a certain amount of allowable frequencies, and so it was always even. All this basically. Comparatively speaking, every market had the same amount of radio stations serving the same amount of people. So you had to compete with the local broadcasters, but you're also competing with the major markets that are booming into your market. So it's doubly tough for small market guys like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it there we had, of course, WLW out of Cincinnati, CKLW, and WJR out of Detroit. We had almost all the Columbus, Ohio stations. We were 42 miles from Columbus. So yeah, there was not a shortage. Mansfield, I mean, there was all kinds of small towns. So you could go up and down the dial. This is before all the expansion. Now it's even worse. It's like you hardly find an empty space on the dial when I go back to my hometown. Right. But even back then, it was a pretty crowded dial.
How much has that affected the business, do you think, Jeff? The fact that they opened up the frequency even more, and on the FM especially, to where it has splintered the advertising dollars so much that these little guys can't even. So they're throwing it on the bird, as they say. They're putting on a satellite format. There's not even any kind of local talent now.
You know, you're asking the wrong guy, because after I left radio in 1997, I never looked back. So as far as your question directly, I'm really not qualified to answer it, because I just haven't really kept up with the business that way, you know. But yeah, obviously, the more signals there are, the more saturation, the more competition for those advertising dollars, and it may not be the license to print money that it once was back when we were doing it.
Oh yeah, you especially in the small market there, Gene. You were part of the community. You were with the Chamber of Commerce. You belonged to the Rotary clubs. You were really a part of the community. Is it still that way? Are you still involved with it that way?
And of course, I've been out since. I actually worked at a missionary radio station in rural Alaska. I can talk about that. 400 people in the community.
Wow.
Maybe 2,000 potential total audience in the coverage area. So I could talk about that a little bit, but I still think that there's a place for small market radio, and I think it's not done very well very many places. It's sad because, you know, I've sold several this day. Let's see, I had 4 different operations. Some of them were AM and FMs. And, you know, as I look back, not a one of those operations is doing very well. I had the one FM where I was, as far as I know, I've never heard anybody doing more money in a standalone community, 2,800 people, and we billed $2 million in 1997. I've never heard of anybody approaching that to this day, but now it's part of a 5-station complex, and they're not even billing that amount with all 5 stations, all 5 signals, and they moved it to a bigger community. So it's sad, and I could go with all the stations I sold. There's not a one of them that's doing anywhere near what I think they could do if I had a chance and decided I wanted to take control again.
You know, just being here talking to 2 radio guys like you, the irreverent thoughts are already coming back into my head.
Let me tell you, Gene, any conversation I've had with Jeff since he got out of the business, if I start talking radio, which I love talking radio, it's my passion, he goes, not interested.
You don't want to hear my irreverent thought? Is that what you're saying? He cut me off.
Hates radio. Or I don't know if you hate radio. You hate the business.
No, just
it's frustrating for me again to listen to some of these stations, and I hear the programming and I hear how they're not relating to their community. And it's not so much, I mean, yeah, they may not have quite as many people on staff, but it's more just not doing the right things. And it gets frustrating. So I have trouble listening because I critique, but I do say I do listen, and I listen to a lot of streaming stations, including I still listen to my station where I started occasionally back in Mount Vernon, which is no longer on AM. They shut the AM down, but quirk of this is I'd never heard of anybody doing this. They had a translator, and they also their FM was HD, and so along the way they put the AM signal on the digital 2 channel, and then they ran into some engineering problems where it was going to cost a fortune to fix it. And so they petitioned the FCC to change the translator into a translator for the HD2 channel. And so they still, and it's doing very well. I mean, everybody had kind of switched over to FM anyway, and they still have the local content. It's not quite like it was back in the 70s when I was there, but they still do an admirable job. And I hear some other stations in traveling. Every once in a while I'll run into a station. I'll say, hey, these folks know what they're doing. So there's a few, but there's a lot fewer than there used to be.
Jeff, you're on OMHS, is where I read a bio that you'd written up, and you go through all the radio stations, the beginning of your career, and then towards the end, sadly the end, and you look back and you said, I wish I would have realized at the time that KYUU was going to be the pinnacle. Because from there you went to KISS in Concord, AM and FM, which is just on the other side of the Bay Bridge and over the mountains. They call it the East Bay, but even though there's no bay near it. And I was doing afternoons there before I got hired back to Sacramento for mornings.
I was listening to your merciless taunts about me on your show, and I thought that's okay.
They were looking for a morning. They were looking for a morning guy. I did not want to do mornings. Not interested. I'd done that my whole career. I hate getting up early, but yet that's all I've done. So I love doing afternoons. That was my first foray into that drive time.
I preferred afternoons to mornings too, to be honest.
Oh, it's awesome, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have almost the same amount of freedom, but you don't have to get up so early.
Yeah, and not quite as much money, unfortunately. That seemed to be where
no, it wasn't. So I knew that Jeff had, I don't know what happened at KYUU, why you were there doing so well, and then suddenly you're gone. But I knew that you were looking for something. You and I had talked, and I go, Jeff, what would you think about Concord? Dr. Don Rose used to own the station. He worked here. Maybe you could come over here and do mornings, at least until you find something else. You turn that into, but Jeff tells a story, Gene, on this OMHS website about the new owner that came in. The new owner came in. You and I both worked, starting off with Chabin, Jim Chabin, was it?
Yeah.
Working for him.
Yeah.
And Sean McMahon, KSA made FM, Sean McMahon.
And Sean is a great friend of mine today.
I want to talk to him. I want to get. Let me know how to get a hold of him. I'd love to talk to him again. But anyway, Jeff writes this story about this new owner that comes in. Here you've got a major market talent with a proven track record of success, and they're starting to see ratings increase in that little old AM and FM combo in Concord that they hadn't seen. It's working. Jeff's working. But this new owner comes in and he starts harping on Jeff about, well, I need you to stay 3 hours longer every day, just in case a commercial comes in or something. And Jeff's like going, no, I'll do it the next day when I get off the air. I already have a stack of prod you want me to do anyway. But this guy kept insisting. And I think that was a lot of why you decided, screw this business. Am I wrong?
Well, not entirely, no, because that did happen. He wanted me to help new talent, break him in, and he wanted me to drive the prize van and change light bulbs and all that. And I said, look, that's not what I'm here for. While I'm here in the morning, I will do whatever you want. I'll stick around for an hour and do all the commercials, but I'm not going to be here all day. It's just not what I do. And I ended up getting a job doing afternoons in San Diego. I left that station to go to San Diego to do afternoons.
And I was happy for you. I thought that's perfect. You'll love San Diego. They'll love you.
Yeah, they did for about 6 months until they sold the station and fired everybody. And I just bought a
Yeah.
house, got my family moved,
Damn
and
it.
so that turned out to be a real nightmare. And actually, getting to Gene here, I had always dreamed about ownership, smaller market ownership. That was kind of my goal for a long time. And then after the San Diego thing blew up in my face, I ended up doing mornings and operations manager for a station in Santa Barbara that was in receivership. And part of the allure of that wasn't the whopping $1,500 a month I was making to do all those things. What was part of it was I was going to earn some sweat equity. And if the then acting general manager who was contemplating buying the combo, if he bought it, then I was going to get part ownership or get a piece of that. Well, all it took was about 3 or 4 months of dealing with all the small market problems and people, it's like, what? And I thought, okay, maybe I don't want ownership because I just managing people was not my greatest joy. And I could have been better, and I wish I would have been better. But I was trying to do a show. I was trying to program the stations, and someone would come up to me with just an absolutely ridiculous problem that they wanted me to solve, and it's like, just do it, fix it. You can do this. You don't need me for this.
You're a
But
grown
anyway,
ass adult.
yeah. But radio was fun, and the reason I left KYUU, I was there for 6 years, and best job I ever had. But in the last year, there was a lot of big changes. They brought in a new program director who had never been a program director from one of their stations in Washington, D.C., and he was changing the format, and it just wasn't working. And the station it kind of lost its identity. And then NBC, as you mentioned, owned the radio station. They owned many stations as a holdover from when RCA, they were owned by RCA originally. RCA had a 75-year tradition of radio, and we're really excited and proud to be a part of it. It was when I first got there, I was 22 years old, and there were engineers on the other side of the glass pushing all the buttons, and I'm just talking, going like that, and it was like dying and going to heaven. It was the big time. It was great. And then a few years later, after that, there was, now we're going to be combo, and NABIT isn't going to be running anything anymore, and you're going to do okay. That's fine because that's how I learned the craft, running my own board. So it's all good. Well, in the last year, they decided they were going to sell the radio division. And knowing that, I really wanted to get fired. I was intentionally wanting to get fired because it was a union station. It was an AFTRA, American Federation of Television Radio Arts station. And I accrued over that 6 years a really nice chunk of severance. And it was going to be, tens of thousands of dollars, a lot of money. So if I quit, you forfeit that. If you get fired, you collect your severance. So my goal was to get fired. And one of the ways I did this is I knew that the new owners were listening. They were monitoring the station, Emmis, and they were owned in part. David Letterman had a part of them, I think. But anyway,
I forgot about Emmis.
Our general manager at the time, who I won't name because I don't want to embarrass him, decided that we should start calling the station the Q, because KYUU.
You were rebranding.
Q. Yeah, it was so stupid because the station had been a huge success. Now we're going to be 99.7 the Q with a rainbow logo and all that entails.
Really?
So we're supposed to say 99.7 the Q. So I love this part of the story. It's my favorite part. I'd get on the air, and every once in a while I'd go, 99.7 the Q. Fuck you.
That's exactly what came into my head when you said that. It's just too easy.
And the thing was, I knew
Fuck you.
they'd probably fire me over that. But if they did, I had it on tape, and it's clear I'm saying the Q. It's just all in how you're saying it, And sure enough, eventually I got my invitation to leave, and I got called into the office with the general manager and the program director. And this was about 2 months before Emma was taking over. And they go, really long face, because I got along with these guys fine. We were always friendly and respectful, and we always got along. And they said, "Gee, Jeff, I'm so sorry, I have to do this." And I smiled and I said, "I just hope it works out as well for you when it's your turn, because you think you're going to be here. When they come in, guess what?" So I was actually thrilled when I got fired, and I let out a big woohoo. So when I hit the elevator, and I still have the lobby sign from the station. I can't show you, but yeah. So that was actually one of the happiest days of my life. But I didn't realize it was also the end of my biggest time in radio.
And that's the thing. We think it's never going to end. I mean, I attained, the status. The largest market I ever worked was San Francisco, fourth largest in the nation. That's pretty dang good. Worked in LA some, but not in an everyday capacity, just doing commercial work and so on, and film work. But the being on the radio in San Francisco was more important to me because that's where my heroes were. That's who I was listening to. That was Dr. Don Rose. That was John McFlanagan. That was Rick Shaw. That was the Duke Sholin. Those were my people that I listened to, that I wanted to sound like. I wanted to replicate. Don Blue was another one. You got to work with him at KYUU.
Yeah, great guy. And when you mentioned Rick Shaw, I have family in San Francisco. That's where my mom is from. So my grandparents lived there, and my aunt and uncle and cousins. I'd go up to San Francisco and I'd listen to my grandmother's old 1937 Zenith floor radio, listening to these guys like Rick Shaw. And then when I first walked into there for my interview, and I see Rick Shaw and I hear him and I go, wow, this is crazy. I'm going to be working with this guy.
I know.
I grew up listening to this guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone was so. That place was really special because everyone was a real pro. Everyone did their own thing, but we all had a lot of self-respect and respect for each other, mutual respect. That's what I meant to say.
Right.
We all had a lot.
And we think it's going to last forever. We've attained this status, and you have to work hard at staying at that level. And I didn't. I took the first job I could when ABC was bought by Disney, and they fired like 1,000 of us all across the country on the same day.
It doesn't matter how hard you work. Sometimes it's just not in your hands.
Well, I made the mistake of going from the fourth largest market to taking any job I could get, and that was Salt Lake City. I should have never done that. That was a career killer. And then as much as I did not like living in Utah, because I'm not one of them, and they let you know you're not welcome there. I used to get people leaving anonymous notes on my door, Gene, telling me you're not welcome here. Go back where you came from. I'd never experienced that in my life. So I wanted to get back to California. So I took whatever I could get, and that was Fresno. So I went here. You're
doing
I killed my career as a major market talent. I really did.
You were doing the Harry Chapin thing.
Yes, I was. I was WOLD. So Jeff brought something up that I'd love to hear your take on it, Gene. And that, as an owner and as a manager, you probably had to let staffs go when you would buy a new property. What was that like?
Well, and I tried to work with the people that were there.
Oh, sure you did.
Well, actually, one of the employees was still there when I sold the station in Ord, Nebraska, which was 11 years. But I probably, like when I sold the station in Central City, been on the air 12 years. The newest staff person I had been there 6. And I had 2 that had been there from the start, that I'd hired from the start. Now, I've done 2 startups, and those are a little bit different because I had did go through some people in the beginning, because you gotta have the bodies. Because, okay, I gotta have somebody sell ads. I gotta have somebody to do, be on air. I gotta have somebody to do the news.
Production person.
Small market. So yeah. So and sometimes you take what you can get, because some people, especially if they're experienced, they go, I'm not taking a flyer on that. That thing may not even be here a year from now. Of course, I proved them wrong. My first station was kind of interesting. I put it on in Osage City, Kansas, a town of about 2,600 people. Signals beaming in from Kansas City, Topeka, and Wichita. In fact, my experience was in country, and I had pretty good background on the programming side. I learned some things on that side, but also the sales side. 61 country, WDAF was one of those AMs that was just dominant in Kansas City, well into I think into the 90s. They were still number one in Kansas City.
And running farm
as an
reports
AM.
in the morning, right?
Yes. And it was just, I mean, when I went into town, here I am, I'm putting this station together. We're, buying transmitter, which we bought a 1948 RCA transmitter to start. That didn't last very long.
Glowing tubes.
Yes. That didn't last very long. But anyway, I had a lot of people who were with me at that station for a while. But anyway, I had KTPK, 100,000 watt FM country out of Topeka, 28 miles away. I had WDAF. I had KFDI out of Wichita, who was a boomer. And I even had competition from the farms. I did country and farm. The farm station out of Lexington, Nebraska, 880 KRVN, 50,000 watt clear channel. And so they were even selling in my area. So I had to carve out. And again, my background, I knew I needed to be local. I need to be the station that, and there are several key things to that. One is weather. And again, weather's not as important now with all the changes. People get it on their phone, but back then in the 1982, that's how you got your weather. And you could get the very local. If there's a tornado warning, you're on the air nonstop. Music stops. It's all weather. You become the weather channel before there was a weather channel. And then local high school sports. And I have done play-by-play. I started doing that, and I've done every sport you can imagine: football, basketball, volleyball, wrestling, cross country, softball, baseball, tractor pulls. I was the first voice of the National Tractor Pulling Championships in Bowling Green, Ohio, when I was in college. Now it's on ESPN. Back then, we were it. That was the only broadcast, and we had a 3-station network. That I was the voice of the National Tractor Pulling Championships in 1975 and 76, and before ESPN started broadcasting them. So I've done just about any kind of sport.
How do you do play-by-play on a tractor pull?
It's Art Arfon's. He's got his turbo green banana pulling up to the line. He's got the sled hooked up, and the flames are shooting out as the turbine winds up, and he's past 50.
Did you have a
80,
microphone
still
down?
got momentum.
Did you have a microphone pointing at the track so you could bring in that?
Oh, you didn't need to point at the track. It was so
that
loud that I had to talk loud over the sound. I mean, those things are incredibly loud. I didn't need any extra crowd mic for that. That's for sure.
See, Jeff went to the top, and he pretty much stayed there. But me, I have been that WOLD story, and I've worked for huge corporations. At one time, the largest in the world, when it was called Clear Channel, and then I've also worked for little mom and pops, and between the two of them, the steady paycheck, the knowing where your money's coming from, is fantastic in a big market. But getting connected with the community in a small market, like I got to work in Tennessee, which was about 45 minutes east of Nashville. So we got into 100,000 watt FM called the Country Giant. And but the market was small, Cookville. And that's how it was owned and operated, like a small market station, even though we were in a large market broadcasting. And it was
See, I would have
fantastic.
said Cook.
I wish it could have stayed. I wish it could have lasted. I loved it so much, Jeff.
Yeah. I know. Like I
Yeah,
said,
well,
some of these things are out of our hands, you know.
my station in Central City, Nebraska, town about 2,800. All the stations that I owned except for one were in towns under 3,000 population, but it was 100,000 watt FM, and it's a long story how I got to this point, but I was on a TV tower, 2,000 foot TV tower. We were 1,880 feet height above average terrain. So we covered pretty much all of eastern Nebraska.
Hang on a quick second. Let's try and paint a picture for people exactly how tall that one single tower is, where you have guy wires that are going everywhere to keep it upright. How tall is 2,000 feet?
Oh, yeah, it's tall. I forget how many acres they needed for the guy points. It went way out. They were in the middle of a wheat field there. And
that's like 20 stories, isn't it?
Be more than that, I think. The tower actually was 12 foot on a side, and it had an elevator in the middle of it. It was a cage elevator. That's how
Thank God, because my next thought was, who had to change the bulbs at the top for the FAA regulations? Because you had to have lights up there for planes.
Yes. Yeah, they had an elevator. They offered a ride after they put our antenna up on the tower, which that was quite the process, because the wind at 2,000 feet is blowing a lot more than it is at ground level.
Oh, hell yeah. It's a whole different temperature. What were you going to ask, Steph?
What's the statute of limitations for faking tower readings?
Yeah. And see, since it was a TV tower, we didn't even have to worry about any of that. That was their responsibility.
I covered that in the last Hitman show I did. We talked about that because we always wanted to increase power, but then you'd hear, the FCC's in town. Don't. But it's because your signal got out a little bit further than the competition. But we were all doing it.
One of the things that was interesting, that height, I learned how, I already knew it, but I got it well demonstrated there. Our main transmitter was a 30 kilowatt into 10 bay antenna. And then we had a backup transmitter that was 5 kilowatts. So we put out 100,000 ERP effective power with the main, and we put out like about 19,000 effective power with the backup. I could not tell the difference.
See, we don't even know those kind of numbers out here in California, do we, Jeff? We just don't have them. 50,000 watts is as big as an FM can get.
Have either of you guys ever tried to warm up a pizza over a 50,000 watt amp? Because
a hot pocket? Put a hot pocket on the transmitter next to the tubes?
It was in Port Hueneme. God, what were they called? KACY. It was 50,000 watt clear channel station. And this was back in 1979, before there were microwave ovens everywhere. And the pizza guy was late in delivering my pizza, and it was kind of cold, and I was upset because they were really great pizzas. And I'm looking through the glass, and I'm looking at the 50,000 watt transmitter, and each tube was about that big.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what if I just put the pizza box above it?
Slide it right in.
As soon as I opened up the door of the transmitter, the dead switch or whatever activated, knocked us off the air.
Yeah.
Needless to say, we ate cold pizza that night.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about those tube transmitters, when they go down, it takes just like television. Remember how long it took the TV to warm up and come on?
Warm up the filaments. Yeah.
And
it took a long time to fire back up.
You mentioned that, Mike. The station I worked at in college. I went to college. I got married after my freshman year, and my wife knew I loved radio, and I was working at a local warehouse, and she was at the campus employment office, and she saw that they were looking for a part-time disc jockey. And so I think she actually called the station and said, "You need to hire my husband." And, and so she said, "This guy wants to talk to you," the program director. Well, this station was in bankruptcy. It was a court-appointed receivership. The owner had been one of these fly-by-night evangelists, and he was wanted by the FBI and the Securities Exchange Commission for selling stock certificates, investing in the Wings of Prayer Foundation. Well, the only thing that had wings were people's money that they gave to this guy.
Saying goodbye.
And so, I mean, I have all kinds of stories here. So anyway, he was so good. He'd go out to these little old ladies who had money, widows that inherited money, and you can invest in the Lord's work and this Wings of Prayer Foundation. We're going to build this big tabernacle next to the fairgrounds in Bowling Green, Ohio, where I was at school. And he was so slick. He'd get their money and he'd go, "Oh, I left my stock certificates back at the office. As soon as I get back there, I'll fill one out and I'll either deliver it or stick it in the mail or whatever." He was so slick that he'd walk out with a check for like $15,000, $20,000 or whatever with no proof. They had no proof other than their checkbook, and hey, it's just a donation. They're just donating to my group. What stock certificate?
I like to believe there's a sauna set aside in hell for people like that.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So imagine this: I started off as an announcer, and then after working there for 3 or 4 months, I said, I'd like to sell radio. I had kind of gotten to know the sales manager at the first station I worked at in my hometown. So they said, "Hey, we need salespeople, so go to it." Well, I did pretty well. I signed the biggest annual contract they'd ever signed and so forth. And then the sales manager left, and I became sales manager at the age of 19, 3 days before my 20th birthday, June 3rd, 1970. What was it? 75. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I found myself sales manager, and we had some success, but I had to learn to be creative because there had been so many people swindled in the city of License that I found it hard. I go to the Ford dealer and he says, "Oh, well," he says, "yeah, I'd consider advertising if I ever got the money back for the cars I traded out that I never got the money or the advertising for. If you can get that fixed for me, yeah, I'll advertise with you." I go to local pharmacy. They got the Kodak photography, and I just got a deal from Kodak. Hey, they got 100% co-op if you up to $150. Oh, that's your money. I'll just walk in there and get my $150 order.
$20,000 account for the radio.
What's
station?
that?
I tell you about the time I lost the $20,000
$50,000 for me, buddy.
Oh, wow.
I was reading.
What happened?
It was for Safeway Supermarket, and I was reading a tag. And the tag is price value selection. That's why over 3 million people shop at Safeway. And I just added something to it. I said price, value, and selection. That's why over 3 million people shop at Safeway, and they're all in line in front of you.
Oh, yeah.
The lines were terrible.
My morning man lost to me account something. Yeah.
They got him back eventually. But I remember the sales manager, Jack McSorley, coming upstairs with the baseball bat.
Because that's taking money out of their pocket. Yeah, I lost a $50,000 buy when I was with CBS Radio Disney. Because I called Michael Eisner the Antichrist, who was the CEO of Disney at the time.
I just did a job for Disney this past weekend.
Did you?
Oh, I got to be very careful with you guys.
Be very careful.
I think I had I think it was $22,000 contract. We had a modular home manufacturing plant, and our morning guy had one of these joke services, the morning prep services, and they had some joke about tornadoes attracted to mobile home parks. And the owner or the manager, I guess it was, of the plant happened to be listening that morning. That $22,000 contract went out the window, and he never spent another penny.
I almost got fired in San Jose at Hot 97.7 because I said something that pissed off the sales manager's girlfriend.
So you see,
Who was like 40 something at the time, and our target demographic was a 22-year-old. So I asked the GM as he's screaming at me
cancellation
over this because something I said on the air that she was offended by. And I asked, well, how old is she? I don't know, it's 40 something. And I go, is that our target demographic?
But
you realize what I was saying. And
you mentioned a little while ago.
I'm not talking to her. I'm not talking to her. Why are you giving so much credence to that? But it's real easy. That's the problem being talent. And I'm sure Jeff will back me up on this. Everybody has a say in your future.
Yeah.
The listeners have a say. If you offend somebody or some group gets all pissed off, like when I was with ABC, I made the gay community.
Cancellation is worse now than it was then, but
it's worse now. You had salespeople because you pissed off a client that they lost, you lose your job. You got new manager, new program director comes in, he wants to bring in his buddies. He doesn't want to work with you. You lose your job. Of course, the general manager, new ownership changes. We're going a different direction. Everybody has a say in your future. And I have gotten to hate that. That's why I love doing this podcast now, Jeff.
Yeah, well, and I have a little bit different take on this. We talked a little bit early and just touched on it. I used to have this speech when I was hiring new people. And when I had the station in Central City where we were billing big bucks, I hired a guy out of Tucson, two guys out of Chicago. I was trying to think where else. But anyway, my whole pitch was, if you're tired of the big market, you want stability and still make, decent money. I couldn't necessarily pay major market, but I could pay enough.
You got remotes, you got endorsements, you got all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, and you also have a cost of living that's maybe 65, 70% of the big city.
Right.
I have to laugh. I hired a news person out of Seattle, and she says, what kind of public transportation do you have? And this is a town of 2,800 people. And she ended up riding her bike to work because she did not have a driver's license. But she found out that it'd be like 6 blocks away. She could find an apartment and ride her bike to work. But it was an adjustment. But again, I had this speech when I hired him. I said, I'm hiring you hopefully for this to be your final job. My whole goal is that it works out for both of us, and that you never have to look for another job.
How many owners and GMs do you know like that with that attitude, Jeff?
Not too many.
No, it's pretty unheard of.
Well, and again, this goes back to the first station I started at. In fact, the guy that I mentioned that went off to Vietnam, when he came back from Vietnam, he worked there his entire life till he retired, and we're still friends. And the program director worked there through like 3 ownerships. The station ended up being owned by Clear Channel for a while, and then they unloaded it and sold it again to a local broadcaster, which was a good thing. It was much better. A guy that out in Ashland, Ohio, that owns I think 3 or 4 different markets. But that was the case at that station. The sales manager had been there since the station started in 1953, and that was I was there like in 1973. So 20 years later, he's still there. Day one, one of the guys, CHARLEE Kilkenny, was there. He had left for a while and came back. I mean, just about the whole staff. So that's what I was used to. The news director had been there for years. And so I saw the value in that. And one of the things that I also did is I did a profit sharing thing. Every year I'd give an annual bonus. I set aside 10% of
unheard of.
And then I had a formula based on tenure and salary. They got so many points for every year they work there, and so many points for their every $1,000 of salary. And then it was all divided up. And when we were making like 400,000 to the bottom line, that was $40,000 split up between the employees, all full-time employees. And that also does a lot to help with this conflict that you have a lot of stations between programming and sales, because all of a sudden you got programming people say, hey, I heard there's a new business opening up you might want to call on, or, yeah, I'd help with that production. And, I got an idea for that client. or whatever, all of a sudden you got them. Not, I mean, it didn't totally eliminate it, but it sure helped soothe over some of those things. We didn't have quite the conflict that I've seen at some stations.
You know why? I think I'll speak for Jeff. If he says I'm wrong, he'll correct me. But the reason why we have a little hard problem working with salespeople is usually just one or two people who are so disorganized. They bring you copy, they bring you a commercial. This starts tomorrow at 6 a.m. It's like 9:30 that night, and it's got to have client approval. Will you call them when you're done and play it for them?
Yeah.
And they come in while you're on the air, come into the studio. Charlie, I got to get this spot on right away. What is wrong with you? Get out.
Yeah, I hear you. Been there many times, and in small markets sometimes it's almost unavoidable. Our biggest month, and the last station I had here in Ord was February. You know, that's usually the worst month of the year for most radio stations. That oftentimes would be our best or second best month of the year, and that's because we had several things going on. We had bull sales. Bull sales were huge money.
Bull sales?
Bull sales. People selling bulls. Some of these bulls go for $20,000, $40,000, and they got a bull sale of, you know, they've got like 38 bulls or whatever to sell. You might sell a $2,000 advertising schedule for those, and we had a number of them.
Jeff, did you ever have to give a bull report anytime in your career?
I've eaten out of a few porcelain bowls, but
that's about it.
No, I never do.
That's the end of it.
We also had pre-plant sales on seed corn and soybeans, seed soybeans.
But see, we Californians, we're such snobs. We don't even live this life. We're thinking that's on the radio. Who's going to listen to that? Everybody. That's their life.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing was we had basketball playoffs, regional playoffs for basketball, boys and girls. And we had state wrestling was our number one sales thing. We'd sell $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 worth of ads for 3 days. But going back to these deadlines, the districts would be over. They'd end on a Saturday. The state started the next Thursday. So we had 3 days to sell those ads. And so we had everybody. In fact, I'd pull my wife in to get on the phone and help out. She would do that when we had overload times. She was a retired registered nurse, but I'd say, hey, make sure you're available those 3 days so you can hop on the phone and help everybody else out. And so we had all hands on deck selling ads. And sometimes we were producing ads late into the night, Wednesday night, to air Thursday morning for the start of state wrestling.
Yeah. Jeff, you're one of my heroes. You always have been from the very first time I heard you. And then when I got to meet you, you did not disappoint. And I just consider it a great blessing to even be able to call you a friend. And I'm glad we've stayed in touch, even though we've gone sometimes years without even talking to each other. And then we'll get back together again. But you and I have run in so many of the same circles. We know the same people, and we share a lot of passion for a quality product. Not necessarily depending on the market size, but just a quality product. Sure. And Gene, I really respect you because even though I didn't want to talk politics on this show, I like to focus the hitman, just stick with media. But I want to have you on again because you became a political consultant. Yeah. And like me, you're on the conservative side. So I don't want to prejudice anybody in media who's watching around. Oh, I can't listen to him because he's a Trump supporter. Well, look at Jeff's hat. Okay. So get over it, son.
I guess I get over the wrong party.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your time so much, both of you very much. And thank you for making this we've been on the air for over an hour and it just went right by. Real fast.
It did go by fast. Thank you for having me, and nice to have heard your stories, Gene, and to meet you. And
yes, nice to meet you.
Great guy to work for, and I'd love to know your skincare regimen because you're 5 years older than I am, but somehow you look younger, and that's just not right.
So it's not right.
Maybe you're using that Particle 6 for men, or I don't know what you're doing, but it's working.
It's almost spending so much time in front of the transmitter with all that effective radiated power.
So Anyway, Charlie, it's always been a pleasure for me, pal. And you know I love you. We go back a long, long way. Like you said, we don't talk all the time. We'd probably drive each other crazy if we did. But anytime we get back together, it's like it was just yesterday. So
Thank you, brother. Where do we find you, Jeff? Where do we follow what you're doing or become a part of your life or at least follow your career?
probably jeffmcneal.com, MCNEAL, JEFFMCNEAL.com. That's probably a good place to start. And I got, all sorts of content up on YouTube, of course. But yeah, that's about it.
How about you, Gene?
Oh, well, I guess Facebook's probably the best place. That's where you found me. I actually have I have GeneMcCoy.com registered and never used it. I've had it for, I don't know, 12 years or so. I keep telling myself that I got some uses that I could put it to use, but I haven't done it so far.
Maybe you can sell it and make some money.
Yeah.
You're good at that.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. I'll talk to you soon. What a great joy, man. What a great pleasure. I absolutely love talking radio. I love talking the business. And I love talking to people who have taken something and made it great out of, just work their way up, like Mike Lindell. That's a transition into my commercial. I have my middle name Lee as a promo code, up to 75% off. You can save at mypillow.com/Lee, mypillow.com/LEE. Please support him. Over 100 different products, all American made in one place. mypillow.com/Lee. And from there, you can go to the regular page. And you can see all the other specials. Just remember my name, Lee, is the promo code. Thank you very much for your time. May God bless you and keep you. May God bless America. But most importantly, America bless